So I want to talk about keeping control of your modelling and what that means. So what I see with beginner students is that the models quickly become very lumpy and then people don't know why. So I want to talk about how to stay in control of your modelling. So it's important that we think first and then act. And eventually this will become instinctive, you won't spend time thinking, but initially I want you to understand what needs to be moved, only select the things that need to be moved, and to constrain the movement that you're making to the correct axis, to only go in the direction that you need it. Yes, if you're not in control, if you don't understand these three things, then you'll get problems like this. So this plane looks flat, but when I move it you can see that it's not. It's not in any way flat at all, it's completely wonky. But when I put it back to here, it appears flat, and that's an optical illusion created by the fact that we've got this tiny 2D window into our 3D world. And this kind of thing can happen all the time. When you have more and more complex models with vertices and lines all over the place, it becomes even more difficult to keep track of what's going on, so you must be methodical. So, for example, if I've got this knife, let's say I want to make a change to the blade design. So, I want to make the blade thicker, say, so I'm going to select some vertices like this, and then I just drag it out like this, right? And that looks like I've made the blade fatter. But you can see if I look from the front, then I've actually made the blade wonky. Now, that's a very obvious bit of wonkiness to my blade, but it could be much more subtle. So we could end up with a blade that looks ever so slightly wobbly, so it won't initially be quite so obvious, but over time all these little areas will come together and just really trash our model and make it lumpy and unpleasing and hard to control. But if I look at this from the front, you can see that this blade is just perfectly symmetrical around the x-axis, and you know that's going to help the image of it. But if it's wonky, it will just look like an old rusty blade, which isn't what I want on this kind of precise technical blade. So the idea is then that you think and then move. So say I want to adjust the sign of the blade here. If I work from the top view, and I can see that it's the top view because I'm seeing top in the viewport display, then I know that when I drag on any of these vertices, let's add an edit polybody file here, when I drag on any of these vertices to change the profile of the blade, it's pretty much impossible for me to make a really big mistake. I can't accidentally make the blade wonky in the Z direction. Now there are some instances where this isn't possible. So let's say, for example, I'm making a box, and let's make an editable poly. So let's say I'm making a cardboard box, for example, and I want to drag out the sides. Well, that's really easy to do in Max. So just click on an edge, and then I can shift drag aside to pull out the edge here like that. But I need to be careful about what axis I'm doing on, otherwise again we get this strange problem where I get this very warped edge to my box. So I need to make sure that I'm analysing where the edge needs to go. So here I can see that I don't want it to move in the X direction at all. I only want it to move in the Z axis and the Y axis. So I can make sure that I do that by using the transform gizmo correctly. So I know that I want it to move up and I want it out in the right direction, so I make sure to pick this plane in between the y-axis and the z-axis, and then when I shift drag I know it can only be going in the correct direction and I don't have any problems with this kind of optical illusion. So then if I make my cardboard box, I can just walk around now and make sure that I choose the correct plane. So here the y and z axis are chosen by default, so I need to make sure that I change that and don't accidentally drag in the wrong direction. So again, I make sure that I'm going in the x and the z direction and drag out again. And if I'm too fast or too hurried and click on the wrong thing, shift drag, it looks like everything's okay, but actually it's all gone slightly wonky. So I need to make sure that I get into the habit of initially very carefully choosing the axis, checking that it's highlighted, and then dragging. And eventually that will become second nature, and it won't be such of a bias. So I'm choosing the axis, checking it's highlighted, and then dragging out. And that way I won't have problems. So say I want to make an adjustment to the edge of the box, so I need to make sure I'm working out what needs adjusting. So I can't just grab the plane and adjust the box and rotate it, say, if I want to make an adjustment, because it will take all the edges that are attached with it. It doesn't rotate like a normal flap on a box. There's a different world with different rules on how movement works. So I need to make sure that I just grab the edge or just grab the vertices. And that's a kind of an efficiency problem. If I try and grab the edge like this, it's actually going to select all the edges of that box flap, as it were, and then I'll have the same problem. So if I select the vertices, then I can constrain that selection just to the part of the model that I need to move, and then when I move it from this point of view, I get the correct deformation like this. And then I can go through and I can jump into the various views. And I can use the shortcut keys, or I can use the view cube. And make adjustments to my shape. So one last thing to note is that if you do make a mistake, so say I accidentally moved this part of the box in the wrong direction, I know how to correct this and I can make it perfect again, and I could do it by eye, in fact. But generally for the beginner, I'm going to suggest if you do make a mistake and you see what's gone wrong, then always use undo. Undo initially is always going to be faster than trying to correct it by eye. So don't add good work after bad. Always try and stop and fix the problem before moving on. Otherwise you'll just end up with a very lumpy mesh and it'll be ugly. So eventually you'll know how to fix these problems if you discover them later, but it's actually quite advanced and a bit time consuming. So always try and undo things first, and don't compound the problem later. So you need to constantly rotate your mesh, use the orbit sub-object option, or use the zoom extent selected option so you can zoom in to the thing you need and orbit around it. And that way you'll pick up on any areas. So like if this is off to the side, I can't really tell in isolation what's going on. It's only by rotating the object do I get a sense of its 3Dness. So there you have it. I hope that helps you understand how to think about 3D modeling a bit better when you're starting out, and persuades you to kind of just slow down and really consider what you're doing. And I look forward to seeing you all soon.